We cannot redo our lives, but we can pre-do them. We cannot change the past, but we can learn from the experience of others and alter our futures accordingly. Welcome to Pre-Do on Air. I am Caleb Suttles. We would all change something if we could go back in time. We have all experienced a time when our decisions would have been different if we would have known something that we didn't. That is what this show is all about. Each week I will bring you a collection of stories from people who have something to say. People who are exploring their past and are willing to teach us what they've learned along the way. This is a preview of the first episode featuring one of the 3 stories that will be showcased. Meet Gavin. Snap, crackle, pop.
I suppose when you get back on it, it stems back to an innate stubbornness in me that has sent me down an interesting path. I felt myself kind of getting sadder and sadder about 12, and I couldn't really piece it together the whole way. My parents were separated for a little while, but they ended up reconciling, getting back together and all that jazz. But that's kind of when it started. And,
Gavin seemed to be just like any other kid.
I mean, it was a great childhood. I'm not gonna lie. I mean,
but Gavin's problems weren't visible ones. He began to struggle with depression and ADHD at a young age. He tried to convince himself that it wasn't a problem, that he could simply get over it.
I couldn't see any reason that I had to be sad because, the family on the exterior and much of what I had growing up there'd be no reason for someone to be sad like that. And I often point to a movie I saw once. It was called My Life as a Dog.
A little context. I looked up the film and I watched the trailer. The film is about a boy whose mother is dying, and he watches as his world collapses around him. The boy says, "I think about the guy who tried to set a world record for jumping over buses with a motorcycle. He lined up 31 buses. If he'd left it at 30, maybe he would have survived." He then mentions Laika, the dog sent into space that paved the way for human spaceflight. They sent her off in a rocket and let her starve to death. "I've been kind of lucky, compared to others," he concludes. It's important to compare.
And I suppose not to go into too much detail, but that just led down a path where I was and I'm still just too hard on myself, and I don't see what I do as good enough or good often. So it's something that I've kind of gotten a handle on and have begun dealing with, I suppose. It's a weird thing and I still, when I'm talking about it, I don't feel like it's really much of a problem, but it's been such a big part of me and has affected so much of my life for so long that it's difficult to ignore it anymore.
But Gavin's problems are real, by any comparison.
It gets me because a lot of people don't really understand what I suppose ADHD is. They misconstrue it, and it just kind of gets dismissed.
Partially spurred on by the onset of his ADHD and depression, his relationship with his mother became strained.
I like to say my mom, ages from the time I was born till age 9 or 10, she was, the greatest mom you could ever ask. And then as soon as I started to, think critically and ask questions and start to mature a little bit, she didn't know how to make the separation between me as, her child and me as, a growing person.
This turmoil has been corrosive to his relationships. He had planned to get married just a couple weeks ago, but Gavin's relationship with his mother was too much for his fiancée to bear.
Relationship-wise, it has significantly. I've been in relationships essentially since I was 12 or 13 years old, with months here and there. Most of them long-term, though. I was just engaged last year. Actually, I was supposed to get married a couple weeks ago. That was going to be the wedding date, but my ex-fiance now ended up bolting, leaving because of a multitude of things kind of coming to a head at a very tumultuous relationship with my mom, and she just couldn't deal with it anymore. But saying all this, I don't want to get it twisted in any way. I know my mom loves me, and I love her, and I just hope my mom and I can work that out before anything bad happens. So my mom doesn't verbally or specifically make it into actually any of my poems, but she obviously is a big influence on a lot of them.
Instead of medication or therapy, Gavin turned to poetry for solace. It gives him time to slow down, to cautiously consider his words and thoughts, something he often struggles to do. It is his process for organizing the endless thoughts and images rushing through his mind. This fascination with poetry began in college. Unsure of what he wanted to study, he settled on business. But it was a feminist writing course, a class he happened to stumble upon without much consideration, that changed everything for him.
It grabbed me, not necessarily the writing. It was good. I don't like it. I don't read it over again. It wasn't fun reading, but my final paper, she gave us the option of writing our own, short story from the views of the different feminist writers and characters that we had done, and I got to do that, and that's kind of what kicked me off. And I started doing slam poetry and just writing poetry and actually kind of getting it out and doing that, and slowly it's turned into something that I actually want to pursue as my career, what I do.
I asked Gavin to recite one of his poems. He was happy to oblige, but to my surprise, what he pulled from his pocket looked as if it had been found in the dash of Kerouac's car. Pieces of paper taped together in folded accordion style. Each part of the poem was written in different ink. Some lines were crossed out and others scribbled along the edges. This was almost a metaphor for Gavin's writing process.
This is actually how I wrote it, and I keep it like this, and I bring it with me on stage because I feel like it's kind of a physical representation of the affliction itself. I write very much on scraps of paper and just whatever I have handy. Most of these were written while I was standing around at an old restaurant I worked at, standing in front of the door just waiting for people to come in. I'll be standing there writing and whatnot. And I actually have most of my poems are on, loose leaf pieces of paper, and you can see the wears and the holes in the middle. I keep them in my wallet a lot, and I'll walk around with them and I'll pull them out, and it's, you can tell they're with me all the time because that's how I try and memorize it. I only have a couple memorized, but this one not quite, so I do keep this with me.
And then he began.
This one I simply call it ADHD. It's just So it's a snap, crackle, and pop go the synapses in my brain. It's snap, crackle, pop, and then snap, fizzle, fizzle. See, the information stuck in my frontal lobe again with no dopamine to stimulate the bridge to my hippocampus. These long-term memories elude me once again, always burning on my fingertips, but never within my grasp, floating away like dandelion seeds in the wind, leaving me with an ugly empty stem of information without meaning. Determination means nothing. No willpower will help me. Thoughts of mind over matter won't matter when my mind fights off its own process of learning by never allowing a still moment. My feet tapping, fingers snapping, eyes snapping to their peripherals, searching for movement that isn't there. Ears hearing sounds without decibels, constantly keeping my attention divided, united in a cacophony of sights and sounds so vibrant that I can't help but leave my task at hand to follow the Pied Piper in my mind. It's my childhood exuberance turned into adolescent antics and adulthood issues. These loose lips will sink ships when my mouth trips over every word and thought. A sturdy hold just can't be bought when holes rot, whether I like it or not. My efforts go for naught when I can't tie a knot around my thoughts to keep my mind anchored. The flutter of a butterfly steals my eye for the umpteenth time. I could just cry tears of joy and sadness for the beauty and the madness of distractions. These reactions to each refraction of light fracture my productivity, producing a hollow shell of what could be if only this dopamine would not evade me. I feel like I'm crazy. I'm lazy because my memories are hazy. My words escape me, fading from my tongue like camera flashes. My thought process dashes from crash to crash, trying to bridge the gaps between my synapses. My shoulders are nearly collapsing under the weight from the dead space hidden behind my off-red face, embarrassed that I can't sit in place long enough to have the outlines of my memories traced. My poems can't keep pace with the rate at which my pages are erased, so I have to gauge my progress with a broken meter and cracked mirrors. These crooked fears look at me while lurking in the sides of my eyesight, spying on me and reminding me why I'm afraid to let these letters see the light of day in the first place. I could do better if this pressure would just stop thumping with each and every word I say. This cadence is clumsy and the syntax is sloppy, but even Adderall can't stop these thoughts from adding up and coming to solutions crudely hummed out of tune into the offbeat of 1,000 drunken drums. The blunts keep it quiet, but they have little tact and can't keep the foundations of my thoughts intact when attacks are made at my hippocampus each time a new rhyme finds its way into articulation. My hands thirst for the corruption of a clean white page, but there's a knock at the door and my concentration erupts, forgetting the verbal seduction that was running through my head, instead letting the lines that could change her mind tango off into oblivion, entwined with potential that I'm too blind to harness. Now maybe I'm just wasting my time waiting to be harvested, but I mean honestly, I would never part with this mind, even with all those parts missing. Still, I find myself wishing that it didn't have to be this way. I shouldn't have to struggle to remember my Mimi's voice each day. And I don't know what else to say except that I hope snap, crackle, fizzle.
His hands trembled as he read the poem.
Every time I get on stage, anytime I perform a poem, it's very nervous because I've spent so much of my life hiding it, keeping it all inside, and not letting people know that I really am shaking. So it's especially when I'm holding paper, it's difficult to keep that. It's difficult to hide that.
He spent so long trying to convince himself that his problems were insignificant. He hid his fears and insecurities, and now he shares them freely. That's not an easy transition. But he is clearly learning to appreciate himself for who he is. Once he accepted himself and his imperfections, he learned to embrace them. I guess in some way, he couldn't realize his strengths until he embraced his weaknesses. He's now using his challenges to his advantage and inspiring others to do the same.
And I do believe that there are a lot of people out there who feel sad and are upset with themselves and just they look at themselves and they don't see what other people tell them they see, and they don't feel any reason. And I don't know if it's, everybody has depression or whatnot, but I'm sure there are other people out there who feel like me, and, I do want to, speak to them and let them know they're not the only ones confused about why they're sad or why they're upset or why they don't feel good enough, even when all the signs point otherwise, I suppose.
By the way, the main character of My Life as a Dog concludes that he should stop thinking about Laika, the space dog, that people think too much. Time heals all wounds, and you have to try to forget.
Jag har faktiskt haft tur. Om man jämför.
You'll be able to find our weekly episodes at youtube.com/predo-on-air. If you or anyone you know would like to be interviewed here on the show, email me at predonair@gmail.com. And the first episode of the podcast will be up at the end of the week. Thank you for listening.